thank you, Madam Chair. I want to first thank Dr. Feldman for raising that particular issue. I know that's an issue that's on everyone's mind, and I do know that we need to be ahead of that particular discourse rather than behind it. So I do agree that there needs to be some deliberation sooner rather than later about what may be anticipated coming forward. Madam Chair, I'm bringing this particular issue as new business. I had anticipated not having to bring it as new business, but I have communicated consistently regarding this particular issue, which quite frankly, it started out as an issue that emanated from the public's listening to an exchange that we had relative to COVID testing and related procurement. That exchange was between myself, the superintendent, and Mr. Torrance, at which time the record reflects that we were advised that it had gone through an RFQ. So responding to some of the concerns from the public who would have liked to been a part of that particular process, I went and I looked on the appropriate database and came to realize that it was not reflected as an RFQ as it was indicated. That did pose some concerns for me relative to what was represented, what may not have complied with board policy, and quite frankly, the continued erosion in some people's minds and quite frankly in some communities' minds of fair and equitable access to business opportunities. I know we have policy provisions around certain communities, but this was a policy provision that just was blanket, that no matter what it is, these are certain things that are supposed to be had. I shared that information along with the exchange clip from the video, so I had to play it back several times to make sure that I heard what I heard, and I did. And I also provided the link relative to what was reflected on the procurement site. And there were those inconsistencies. I sent that communication in writing on September 28th, and for informational purposes, copied the board and the board attorney. I did have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Torrance, who did give me an explanation that differs somewhat sharply from what was articulated, but an explanation nonetheless, and he assured me that I would receive something in writing as I requested. It wasn't just for me, it was for the board's own edification. And this obviously is not a new space for me. I've dealt with a number of issues relative to procurement since being elected. If you look at the receipts, I've brought procurement items. So this has been an area of interest. I did several follow-ups in emails, one being October 7th after having not gotten a response from September 28th. And I did receive a response on October 8th regarding this particular issue. The response, in my estimation, raised more questions than it gave answers for me. And I asked for some additional information. One was the list of potential vendors for the COVID-19 testing service that was identified and used, meeting notes and quotes from said vendors that were held and received, and a copy of the executed contract with Anuco RX, which is currently providing these services. This information was requested based on the response in writing that I had gotten. And again, there was a difficult time for me having some degree of reconciliation. So what started out as initially a response to a community stakeholder or stakeholders regarding procurement opportunities kind of evolved into something a little different. And I was a little concerned because it was procurement. It was something that may not have followed a pathway of an RFQ. And at the initial review for me, and it's still the case now based on what I know, I have not gotten anything different. It was something that appeared to come outside of the four corners of our procurement process and policy. It was indicated that the the project may have been under Cigna, and again, I asked for that information as well. And I specifically requested, hopefully, to get it prior to today's committee meeting. I stipulated that in the communication. I would appreciate receiving this prior to today's committee meeting. Prior to today's committee meeting. This is a contract for COVID testing services, period. I want everybody to understand what this is about. COVID testing services. This has health, wellness, and medical implications. So I would like to know who's providing these services. Okay, I would like to know at what cost of these services. This is before I even get into a narrative around minority participation. I don't care. We're talking about the health and the wellness. I care about minority participation, but that's not the narrative for me. It's the initial process that we have to follow to make sure that we have the most competitive and the most qualified and the most committed individuals or firms providing these services. And I don't know the firm at all because we don't have any information, because this did not come before the board. Obviously it didn't have to, but whatever process that was utilized, that information should have been made available. And again, what was articulated was an RFQ that was sitting in OEO. It was sitting in OEO waiting. And then later on, I was informed verbally that this was being done through a different pathway. I have a problem with that. And I think we as a board need to be informed of that and need to just have clarity around that. So I have a couple of questions, which I kind of know the answer. Are services being provided? Yes, services are currently being provided. By whom? We have a company that was identified. With whom is the contract with? Okay. And lastly, as I requested, a copy of the executed contract for these services that we are providing. So because I didn't get the written communication, and as I requested it to be shared with my colleagues on the board, maybe Mr. Torrance, I see he popped on the screen. So I did have a brief conversation with him, but this, anytime we get into this narrative, what can be perceived as a pattern of services, contracts, and procurement, I think we need some clarification. So through the chair, maybe Mr. Torrance, he seems like he's ready, willing, and eager to respond, but that was a response that I would have anticipated receiving in writing after having made that request nearly 2 weeks ago. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gowan. And I am looking at the email that you sent right now, which was indeed about 2 weeks ago. So you do make some legitimate comments, and you have questions that you have requested to be answered. So at this time, I believe it would be the right thing to do for Mr. Torrance to be able to respond to the issues that have been raised by our vice chair, which again, I believe, who is providing the services, whom is the contract with, a copy of the contract, at what cost. And I heard that different information was stated at the meeting as opposed to the initial response that was given. So for the sake of clarity, Mr. Torrance, if you could please go ahead and follow up accordingly, sir.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, board members. Dr. Gallen, the original statement that was made at when this was at the board meeting when this was raised was that there was an RFQ issued. The misunderstanding, and I understand now after speaking with you, and is that it was not a formal request for quotations by the district's procurement department. This was an informal process for quotations because this is not a regular procurement using district funds. This was done in conjunction with Cigna and Aon, the board's healthcare consultant. And initially, the pool of vendors did not include any certified firms. So, and I'm going to ask Mr. Steiger to jump in a minute here and give some further details. So when this was seen by our staff, we requested that that OEO be contacted to see if there were any certified firms that were listed for providing these services. In fact, there were 2 firms that were certified with OEO. and they were included in the pool for consideration of this work. One of the firms, it turned out, had a code that said that they did this type of work. When they reached out to them, they actually didn't do testing. The second one was Anuco, which is the firm that actually was ultimately selected, and it is a certified African-American owned firm with OEO. They were the lowest, they provided the lowest price for this service, and they were the ones selected through this informal request for quotation process, which is done through Cigna, Aon, and with input from our procurement department. The response that we provided to you on October 8th, to the board on October 8th, stipulated this, but maybe did not get into the detail that I just stated now, that it was an RFQ process. So when we said request for quotations, that was correct. However, it was not the formal RFQ process through the district's procurement department. Hence, you are correct. It was not advertised, it was not posted on the district's website because it was not a formal solicitation through procurement. And if I may, Madam Chair, ask Mr. Steiger, maybe he can talk a little bit about the cost, because this was one of the other questions that was just raised by Dr. Gallen, if that's possible.
Yeah, sure. Through the chair, Dr. Gallen, the cost actually is a sliding scale depending on the amount of tests that are ordered, right? So the cost, but the medical assistant is $15 an hour for the staffing. The licensed practical nurse is $20 an hour, and a registered nurse is $39 an hour. And then the prices, depending on how many tests we end up ordering, will range from $50 to $75 per test.
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes,
Here lies the issue for me. What we're doing here, we're articulating verbally contractual terms when some of these issues can be easily ameliorated with a documented contract being provided. I know that Mr. Torrance indicated that it was not through formal procurement processes or formal RFQ. I was not aware of any other RFQ process outside of what the board has embedded in policy. So could you clarify that, Mr. Torrance, what RFQ process you and the superintendent were stating at that meeting when you indicated that it went through the RFQ process and it was in OEO and there was no indication whether it was informal or formal? I was speaking about the procurement process consistent with board policy. So maybe you can enlighten and educate me if there's a new informal RFQ process that I may not have been aware of, so I can sharpen my acumen on the various pathways for procurement that may be available that I was not aware of, through the chair.
Go ahead. Mr. Torrance, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, through the chair. And I'm going to defer in a moment to Mr. Steiger, but there is a policy 6332 that pertains specifically to health services. And there is a process identified in there, which is the invitation to negotiate. I don't know, Mr. Steiger, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
No, Madam Chair, I want to answer the question through the chair, specifically the formal versus informal RFQ process. And I can rewind this tape that was articulated. There's an informal RFQ process that was utilized, and I just want clarity around that. You know, through the chair, I'm very familiar with the policies on the books. So if you're going to cite a policy that's on the book, to me, that would say there's a formal process. I want to hear about this informal RFQ process that you just cited. So I don't know if that would be linked to a particular policy position as you're inquiring with Mr. Steiger. I'm interested in this informal process, and I'm sure the public would as well, because as some of the stakeholders, they would have liked to have access to the informal process as well. I only know of one process, through the chair.
So did you want me to answer, Mr. Torrance?
Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Torrance, did you want me to answer that?
Yes,
please.
answer the question, please.
Yes, so through the chair, Dr. Gallen, so this wasn't taxpayer dollars. This isn't M-DCPS money. So there was no formal RFQ that we went through. So in this case, vendors were identified between a group of Aon Cigna Risk Management there was a firm that was identified. We then said, hey, we'd like to get an opportunity for certified firms as well. So we went to OEO and said, hey, do you have any firms that could potentially do this? They looked in the NGIP code. There were two. Those two were vetted by the same group. One was deemed qualified to do the work. Then we asked for a quote from them along with the other ones that had given proposals. So we got those quotes, and Anunco was the African-American female-owned firm that you referenced earlier. They're the ones who are doing the work because they came in as the cheapest price. They're the ones and they were the certified firm recommended by OEO.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Galvin.
Through the chair, I'm having, once again, the difficulty in the stipulation and representation that it was an RFQ process. There was no distinction made at the time at that board meeting. I still haven't gotten an answer versus formal versus informal, but I guess what you're saying, Mr. Steiger, through the chair, and I just heard you indicate that this was not taxpayers' dollars. Now, I may want to debunk that notion in my own way, and I could stand corrected. But if I cite the memorandum that was sent from the superintendent, the third paragraph, it's cited, the cost is deducted from a wellness fund that is maintained by Cigna as a part of its contractual agreement. Who funds the wellness fund, Mr. Steiger? The wellness fund, who funds that?
Through the chair, Cigna as part of their contract.
Who funds it? I didn't say who maintains it, through the chair. Who funds the wellness fund?
Yeah, through the
Go
chair.
ahead, Mr. Steiger.
Through the chair, it's Cigna money as part of the contract that they have with the board. They committed a certain amount of money each year to a wellness fund.
So none of the funds that are in the wellness fund reflects any taxpayer dollars that are coming from the district. None of that money is from the district at all in the wellness fund. None of the money in the wellness fund is a part of the district's self-insured revenue stream, which is maintained by Cigna in the wellness fund. None of that is taxpayers' dollars.
Go ahead, Mr. Steiger.
Absolutely, through the chair, Dr. Gallen. So as part of the contract with Cigna, they establish and maintain an annual wellness fund with their money. However, you could argue that in absence of a wellness fund, they would have charged us less money, right? I don't know if they would have won the bid that way, but you could argue that they're lowering they obviously are charging us more money because they had to establish the wellness fund. But it's the wellness fund that in the contract, it's their funds, but you can make a case that their fee is adjusted because of it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, through the chair, I think the wellness fund, if I understand how you're explaining it and how I may understand it, they receive money from the district as a part of their contract, correct? Through the chair.
So through the chair, if that's the case, that's not the way I viewed it, but I will double check and get back to you. That's never the way I viewed it. The way I've always viewed it.
Through the chair, Cigna is paid a fee by the district, correct?
Correct.
And they're paid that fee from the district's revenue. And they are contractually required to maintain a wellness fund that comes from some of the fees that are paid, correct? Through the chair?
Yes, that was part of their bid, correct.
So
but it's
part
not,
of the money.
But it's part of the bid was that they establish a fund.
Mr. Steiger, can we go through the chair when you respond,
my
please,
apologies,
sir?
Madam
Thank
Chair.
you very much. Thank you.
Through the chair. That part of the contract was that when Cigna responded that they will have a wellness fund, that they will have set up a wellness fund that the district can use on an annual basis from Cigna funds. But you're right, and I think we pay them a fee. We pay them a fee, so you could argue that without that wellness fund, their fee would have decreased. I don't know if that's the case, but you absolutely can make the case, sure.
Or through the chair, without that fee that we pay, which comes from taxpayers' dollars, they will be unable to fund the wellness fund. Because the wellness fund is funded through the fee that we pay them, through the chair.
through the chair, if they didn't have the contract, I don't think they'd support a wellness fund, if that's what you mean. I agree with that. That if they didn't have I don't necessarily, I don't think that is our funds that they are using, but we might be splitting hairs. I'm not sure. I think we might be saying the same thing, but it's not, it is a fund that they establish and set up, but you're right that it's contractual.
Madam Chair, I don't want to belabor the issue again. Some of this may have been avoided had, I still would look forward to a response because it's still not adding up to me. What was represented in RFQ, there was no distinction between whether it was a formal or informal. Now I'm hearing the RFQ was done through Cigna. Is that what you're saying? Cigna did the RFQ? Is that what you're saying? If the district didn't do it, so Cigna did the RFQ through the chair?
No, Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, I'm saying that 6320 lays out 6332, 6320, they lay out processes where we follow a particular type of RFQ. That's not the way this particular procurement was done, because it was done through vetting these firms and then asking for a quote from each of them.
Through the chair, who did that? Did the district do it or did Cigna do it? I'm trying to distinguish between the formal and informal process that Mr. Torrance described.
We did it in conjunction with each other. So it was the Office of Risk Management along with Aon and Cigna as three partners of this.
So through the chair, was current board policy required to be followed as a part of this particular joint venture?
Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, I do not believe so. However, in board policy, this is risk management. It's a risk management purchase, which we have the authority to direct negotiate with vendors. So board policy was followed. I do not believe it needed to be, but through the direct negotiation process for risk management procurements, board policy was followed. But I don't believe it's necessarily needed to be, but it was followed. But not through an RFQ process, through a direct negotiation process that involved quotes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's what I'm saying. Now, this is the first time I'm hearing direct negotiation. What I heard in the previous meeting from Mr. Torrance and the superintendent was RFQ waiting in the OEO. I just heard Mr. Torrance say an RFQ that went through an informal process. Now you're indicating that it's direct negotiation. So I'm not going to belabor this, Madam Chair. I just have some final thoughts. Are they providing services currently through the chair?
Madam Chair, yes, they are. Through the chair, Dr. Gallen. We have done.
My next question, they're providing services. That's a yes, through the chair. Who's the contract with currently through the chair?
So through the chair, the contract would be between, if Cigna wants to have a contract, they would have a contract with Anunco to make sure that the board was covered. What we have is a statement of work between us and Anunco that includes indemnification for the board. That includes what is expected.
I'll restate my question, Madam Chair. Who's the contract with currently for the service that they're providing to Miami-Dade County Public Schools? Who is the contract with currently?
So through the chair.
The reason I'm asking, I asked for a contract and I haven't gotten one yet, and this is a deja vu.
Okay.
So through the chair, Dr. Gallen, since Cigna is paying the bill, a contract would be between them and Anunco. However, I cannot control Cigna, nor if they want to use a contract process. I can control what I can control. So since I can't have a contract, since I'm not paying the bill, what we set up was a statement of work between us and Anunco that clarifies what we expect, what conditions of performance should be, plus the cost, plus indemnification for the board on a multitude of factors. But
how can we
contract would be between Cigna and Anunco.
But through the chair, how do we have the authority to establish those dictates if the contract is not with us?
It's a
You
statement
just indicated
of work.
the contract will be with Cigna, but we're telling Anunco what we would expect them to do, how much and everything else, but it's not a contract with us.
That's right. It's a statement of work that's voluntary that they have signed and agreed to.
Okay,
through the
so
chair,
let me just interject one moment, please. I believe,
okay.
Mr. Steiger?
Mhm.
Thank you, sir. I believe that Dr. Gallen is asking some legitimate questions that he wanted to have a response for. I believe that the superintendent wants to speak as well. But I just want to, state for the record that it's imperative that as we move forward to ensure that we avoid this type of situation that we're dealing with right here in this meeting today, that we submit accurate information which is submitted in a timely fashion. If you do not have an immediate response, that's fine. But when a board member submits a request in writing, such as the one that I have in front of me right now, with a time certain of October 14th, 2020, prior to this committee meeting taking place today, that all this could be avoided if that information was very clearly articulated accurately to the board member. And actually, this request is also asking for all of the board members. We could have all received this information prior to this meeting, and we could have avoided the situation that we are encountering right now. So moving forth, I have seen in the past, there have been some requests that I have personally made, and that some of the responses are not addressing the actions that indeed were taken by the board. So moving forth, I would hope that those that are reviewing the responses that are being submitted to us make sure that they are clearly reviewed so that they accurately reflect what actions have been previously discussed and answer specifically the questions that have been directly asked via those memorandums or emails that have been sent. I think it is fair, though, at this point in time. Mr. Steiger, you have tried to respond. I know, I believe, Mr. Superintendent, would you like to say
Chair,
something?
let me just before you, I just want to finalize one thought on this, pursuant to a request that was already made and a question that has not been answered. And I'm listening very carefully to Mr. Steiger, where I'm asking about the contract. I've not gotten an affirmative answer, but I want to be very, very clear for the record, whether it's an RFQ, direct negotiation, whether we're, quote, splitting hairs about whose money it is. I would represent to a greater extent that if you follow the money, it probably is some level of taxpayer money that we have a fiduciary responsibility to account for. But if all of that is discarded and thrown out of the window, these are our employees. These services, if I'm not mistaken, are being provided on our sites. So I do appreciate the reference to indemnification, but that is a red herring for liability and exposure. You only want to get indemnified from something, that means you want to be protected from it if something happens. So because these are our employees, we're dealing with health and wellness, we're dealing with testing on our sites, I think this is fair game to have that discussion. And again, this was not born out of any health-related concerns. This was born out of a stakeholder group's concern about having an opportunity to be a part of this particular process that was represented to be an RFQ. And now it's no longer an RFQ, was represented to be part of a formal district process. Now we're hearing that it's not. I don't know about anybody else, but I have a problem with that. And I tried to deal with this in a very subtle, direct, and discreet manner, and respectful manner, but I'm knocking on the door of 2 weeks of not a response that is acceptable for me. It may be acceptable for somebody else. It's not acceptable for me. And I'm sure Mr. Torrance, Mr. Steiger, and the superintendent, it wouldn't be acceptable for them with people who report to them as well. So for me, it's not acceptable. I'm still waiting on this information because I think now I even have more questions because I got new information that's been introduced on the record as a result of this discourse. So Madam Chair, you are correct. This could have been avoided, but it wasn't. And I don't know what else I could have done, but on my part, but I'm not going to abdicate my role and my responsibility and obligation to ask the necessary questions, especially when it pertains to the health, wellness, and safety of our employees, and the finances of our district. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think the superintendent wanted to respond.
Thank you. Yes, thank
I'll
you,
come back to
Dr.
you.
Thank you, Dr. Gallen. And
I would like, Madam Chair, I see the auditor is on here because I don't want to dig too deep. I'll be sending either a communication for the auditor, the chief auditor, maybe get behind some of these answers for me that I've not gotten, because obviously I don't have the time to dive that deep in it, and I'm sure her office may have the expertise. I didn't include her initially on some of the communications, but I'll be forwarding that information to her for some follow-up for the board. Thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you, Dr. Gallen. And just for the record, I would like to state that I can personally speak for myself, and no, of course it's not acceptable under any circumstances, based on the fact that requests have been made in a very cordial manner, and responses needed to have received within the timeline that was addressed in your initial request. And hopefully the superintendent can give us some further clarification, but is it acceptable? No. Moving forward, we cannot have that. If there is an extension for a timeline, for a response to be given, then that has to be requested, and I'm sure there'd be no problem with it. But you cannot ignore questions that are being directly asked. That is our fiduciary responsibility, one of those that have been given to us as we sit in these chairs, and we expect to have responses that are timely and that are accurate. So with that said, I would like to go ahead and have our superintendent, Mr. Carvalho, to please follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had not requested to speak, but I have no problem speaking. Number one, I want to thank all of you who participate in this dialogue. I also want to thank staff for their efforts at meeting the requests of board members, sometimes during at times when there are a number of conflicting priorities. And I believe that this is what happened. Staff was obviously in the process of reopening schools. I am not, and I'll go back and look again, certain as to, I'm absolutely certain of the fact that the board member had requested this information prior to the committee meeting. And I believe that it was provided, but obviously, as I'm hearing now, it was provided in a way that did not meet, according to what I heard, all of the expectations that that had been put on that memo. With that said, and I'm not going to elongate the meeting on this topic much further than necessary, I understand the questions that have been asked. My understanding going into the last board meeting when this issue was addressed, I stand by what I said because of the information that I had. When I hear Mr. Torrance speak about a formal versus informal RFQ, I believe that what he means, and that's always been my understanding, is yes, RFQ stands for request for quotation. And sometimes that door is open. For example, in schools, there are requirements that schools, principals have to request at least 3 quotations, and 1 has to be from minority vendor. That's not a formal RFQ. It's a request for quotations. Secondly, it is my understanding based on what I was told, and I think that Mr. Steiger and Mr. Torrance both said the same thing, is what was done here was a collaboration. Now, I didn't have all of the details about it, but I took, when I was informed subsequently, I took pride in the fact that based on a previous board adopted action of establishing these testing sites, that staff was able to find a way of doing it without having to spend general fund dollars. The process that I understand, as was explained, was a collaboration. So staff requested, my understanding, requested of Cigna, even though they didn't have to because it went through the wellness fund. And the wellness fund, by the way, I would be surprised if general fund dollars were invested directly there because I believe it is all Cigna. And that's how we do the mammography tests. We don't do it ourselves. Cigna pays somebody to do it and other types of services to our employees. But the point that was made was, I think staff attempted to save the district money, not use general fund, ask Cigna and Aon to attempt to follow processes for the purpose of engaging OEO and quite frankly, making it more equitable in terms of access. I think that was the only intent, actually, with all the good intention in the world. When the issue of RFQ was mentioned, and again, I'm not going to parse it between formal versus informal, was a request for quotations from certified firms. And that was the concern of staff, was that even though Cigna was going to pay for it, there was an interest in ensuring equity. Therefore, the request was made of OEO for firms who were certified in this arena for request for quotation to begin, meaning for quotes to be obtained via request, a direct request to these firms. And I believe that's what Mr. Torrance was attempting to explain, the difference between formal versus informal. And that is the truth that is known to me. As I said, I was proud of the fact that they found a way of having this firm or these firms engage in a process that they did not have to. Secondly, save money. Thirdly, apply, which they did not have to, apply the principles of equity through the OEO process, even though they didn't have to. Now, as to the point that Dr. Gallen made, yes, I don't know if there were other firms that could have been called, should have been called. It is possible. But that, I think, and we'll look into that, I think that the intention behind these actions that staff took were noble and honest and attempted to resonate, even though the firms wouldn't have to resonate the policy that the board adopts and follows for the purpose of equity. So this is obviously an issue that we will look at again based on Dr. Gallen's request. But I think that the intention was noble and honest. And certainly it's regretful if terminology was used that is commonly used with a specific intent as declared. And I understand that RFQ, from a formal perspective, yes, it's a request for quotes that is published. But I certainly use it, RFQ, request for quotations, in other settings as well. And I believe that that was the way it was used last time around in a public meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. And
Madam Chair, just a follow-up. Madam Chair, I don't want to belabor it.
Thank you, Dr. Gallen, thank you. Just 1 second. I believe the superintendent was finalizing something. You were finalizing a statement, sir?
Yes, I was just saying that we were going to follow up with Dr. Gallen to clarify any missing bits of information that may still be outstanding.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm going to go back to Dr. Gallen. Sir,
I just want to,
at this time, go ahead.
I'll be brief. Just in that follow-up, Mr. Superintendent, through the chair, where we make the distinction between formal and informal, once again, it's the citation. I'm looking here, Mr. Steiger cited policy that the process was invoked through policy 6332, dealing with professional services contracts for insurance or risk management programs. If you look at the first line in that, it says, hey, if the cost of the contract is estimated to cost more than $50,000 annually, the process shall be followed. So there are certain things that have to be followed. And that speaks directly to a policy that Mr. Steiger just cited. I didn't cite this policy, he did. While he was citing it, I was looking it up. So if this is the policy that we're citing, it talks about another number of things, ad hoc committee, benefit selection. It talks about a number of things if it's $50,000 or more. We don't know that because we don't know the cost. The individual cost is analogous to us saying a cost per student, and then later on we find out that the total cost could be multi-millions of dollars. So I don't want to know about the hourly rate and everything. What is the cost? Because in a contract, it will be up to. If it's not our business, that's one thing, but because it's our employees on our grounds, it is our business. And I'm not going to belabor that issue, but I just want to point attention to policy 6332 that was cited by Mr. Steiger as the pathway for this particular process. And if this is the policy that he just cited that I'm reading, then what's being described here has no relevance to this if Cigna is doing their own thing. Not going to belabor it. I'll follow up with the chief auditor, and whatever information Mr. Superintendent is provided, I'd appreciate it being provided to the entire board. Thank you, Madam Chair.